For everybody listening, we're joined today by Dr. Haley Arias,
Yes.
and I'm so glad that you're here. It was fun to see you again. I haven't seen you in years. We used to be in a networking group together, like, gosh, maybe a decade ago. We won't age ourselves, but it's been a while.
Yeah.
But for everybody listening, Haley's a doctor of chiropractic. You're also an associate professor of, I think, biology.
Yes.
Trying to check my notes, see
Yes.
how much of this I've got memorized. But you're also a small business owner. You're a community leader. You're a mom. All of these things, and recently a published author. And I'm super excited about it. I think, we had talked a little bit off camera. I was kind of teeing you up of, like, by nature, it's a bit of a vulnerable and kind of authentic conversation. But to share with everybody and you specifically why I'm so excited to talk to you is, I think, the idea of grief and the fact that you've sort of taken it on yourself to help people navigate grief. And, you've had your own fair share of grief and, adversities and all these things. But when somebody's been dealt the cards that you've been dealt, there are different paths that somebody could take. There's like the bitter, resentful,
Right.
Hard path. And I'm sure there's been plenty of that. But then there's also this, like, desire from you to help people and spread love and good messaging. And that's why I'm so excited to talk to you. And that's what I was going to tell you about. I'm like, I got to wait because I just, obviously before we dive in, but I just want to share that I think that that's so unique and necessary and powerful because, when people are going through those hard times, it's so lonely, and to know that you're using these hard times to, like, create community and share people is just so incredible. And so anyway, all of that to say, thank you so much for being here and for coming on the show and for being vulnerable. I can't wait to kind of dig in and hear more of your story. So I appreciate it.
Yes, thank you so much for having me and all those nice things that you had to say. Thank you. It's definitely, one of those things where you can, and like you said, I've definitely had my fair share of, like, anger and bitterness and resentment and not wanting to get out of bed. And then there's, like, how long am I going to do that? Like, how long before you say, like, all right, well, this is really crappy, but, when do you turn it into, like, a privilege? And I think at some point along the way, I had to say that, like, when is all of this loss? When does it become a privilege to have this life? Because now I think there's beauty in, like, people actually sharing and just to dive in. I lost my brother when I was 11 years old to a car accident. And so that was kind of, that was my first tango with, tragedy. And, we had a really picture perfect family. And then that happens and you realize, like, wow, it's, like, really fragile. Like, life's really fragile. And wow, everything just changed.
You were 11?
Yes.
And how old was he?
21.
21, okay.
Yeah. And so I'm the youngest of four, and love every minute of that. But and so, like, that happened, and that just, you're like, all right, yeah, life's fragile, and everything can change really quickly, and the dynamic in the family, of course, changed, and so I kind of became, not completely on my own. I wouldn't say that, but definitely, all right, gotta fend for yourself sometimes, and so that is actually where the idea for the book came from, was that 11-year-old girl trying to make sense of it and figure it out, and I'm from the South, if nobody could tell, but I'm from the South, and I love it, but there's definitely some let's be put together,
like cultural norms.
Totally. And so, like, let's keep it together, and let's, and yes, this just happened, but let's not overshare. And And so you do, like as a kids, just start figuring out like, well, okay, well, what does this mean for me? And what do things look like now?
So did you feel like, because one of the things you were talking to me about off camera was kind of I was asking you about kind of like the research and, helping people navigate, when they're in grief and things like
Right.
that. And, I know that a lot of it has sort of happened, I'll call it organically, when you were doing your chiropractic practice. But I'm curious, when you look back in hindsight, the 11-year-old girl in Georgia, right?
Yeah.
Do you think that some of that it stems from like lack of resources that you had at the time, or do you think that it's been, because it's funny, like we were just talking about it off camera, but that I'm kind of on this mission of inspiring people and injecting positivity and all of these things, and you're on this mission with helping people with grief and all of that stuff. Sometimes you can kind of look and have that benefit of hindsight and be like, oh, that's why, because I needed some of that. I'm curious if you have any insight of that when you were young, or if that sort of came to fruition, as you matured in your career and as you grew older.
That's a really good question. I have never thought about it until right now. But you're probably right. I definitely became a lot more aware of loss and death as a kid, because if you've not experienced that, you just kind of be about your day and you don't think about that, which is a great thing, But I would say that as a kid, I became very like hyper aware of that. And when friends lost somebody, or even teachers or other people in the community, I can distinctly remember anytime I would hear, even an adult, passed away, I would, sneak cards and mail cards to them. Not like it was a bad thing. My mom would have totally let me do it, I don't know why I thought I had to sneak it. But just like, well, I probably don't want to, my mom probably thinks this is silly or whatever. But I started doing that as a little kid.
Interesting.
And, writing letters to people like, I know how you're feeling, and I can't imagine what those letters said, but they were trying to be encouraging.
Yeah, well, I'm sure they were. It's funny because I think, and I want to hear more about your story for sure, but I think that on a bigger picture perspective, there's you had touched a little bit on like the Southern nuance with grief, but I think that goes beyond just the South. Like culturally, it's so sometimes like I know that people want to do something, but don't know what to do.
Sure.
Don't know how, it's like, gosh, I feel for you so much, but I don't know what to do.
Sure.
What do you say? How do you act? Whatever. And so I love that even from an early age, you're like, I'm going to at least do something.
Right.
I've always kind of defaulted to the idea that if it's with good intentions, people will know that.
Sure.
And that there's no such thing as too much love.
Right. That's a good motto.
Kindness and stuff, like whatever. If it's awkward, who cares? But I'm gonna, put it out there. But that's an interesting thing to think about, with this conversation of like navigating grief, of the other people also sometimes don't know what to say or how to act.
Totally. Well, we've just recently experienced quite a few losses within our kind of sphere of friends and around us, and it's always awkward. It's always, you always want to do, and you see that pain and you want to do anything you can to take it away, and I just always tell people, just do something.
Right.
Because people will remember, And what's funny is like you also kind of remember who you expected to and didn't. And that's kind of an interesting thing. So I just thought, just do something.
Yeah, anything. So tell me more about the transition, because you talked a little bit about how you I don't know, I guess I'll say through the chiropractic practice sort of attracted the people that you were meant to be helping. I want to hear kind of how, that has come to fruition and how your focus has sort of, shifted over the last few years of, where your priorities and where your energy's gone. Yeah. Because I think that's fascinating to know that there was a change in direction, but that it sort of stemmed from the chiropractic practice.
Totally. I was a chiropractor and had a private practice here in Durango for right at 10 years. And it was kind of one of those things where you just, you kind of go through your Rolodex of patients and you're like, oh, right, there was like a lot of loss. And that's when people were showing up, and that stuff was showing up in their bodies. And, it might not come out on the first visit, and I might not know that they just experienced a loss, but it would come out pretty soon after. And then after a while, you're like, wow, I'm like attracting these people. And, but it also kind of tells you, like, there's something here. There's something like I'm meant to do more. And, with the practice, I just, it kind of came to a point where I was ready to have a family, and I knew there was like some shifts gonna happen. And what I found so interesting, like so many women do, is like, okay, this is my timetable, right? And this is supposed to, right, so we'll have a baby next year, and that didn't happen.
I was gonna say, how'd that go?
Yeah, no, it wasn't this time.
Tell me about your plan.
Yeah. Exactly, right? That's what God said. Like,
Right.
hey, that's cute.
Yeah. Thanks a lot.
So after I exited, practice, I thought I'd take a little time for myself, try to start a family. I'd put career first for so long. And what was so interesting is it's like, oh, this is not happening, and like month after month it wasn't happening. And so to overshare a little, but then my husband and I started the process of IVF. And so I didn't know much about IVF. I didn't know, I just thought, yeah, you pay a ton of money and it works. That's why I like this works.
That's about where my understanding is.
And that's what, with most things, right? You're like, oh, I just write the check and it works, right? Not so much. And so what was interesting about that is we lost our first baby. And when I say like that rocked me more than probably anything, it shattered me, because there was never, for me, I never doubted it would work, and so then to be faced with that, it was just like, oh my gosh, you're kidding me, and I felt like that 11-year-old girl, like all over again. And of course, my husband, Matt, and I were having totally different experiences. And I remember I couldn't sleep. And so I would go on our back porch and I would just journal for hours in the middle of the night. And I'd be wrapped up in blankets, and he'd come outside and he'd be like, what are you doing, And I'm just looking up at the stars, and I'm just like asking why. And I'm like, haven't I been through enough? I feel like everybody has that question, right? Like, haven't I been through enough? Like, don't I get this, ask for this? And that's where like the book kind of came together. And so it was through that, I don't even remember if it was a couple days or a couple weeks later, I wrote it and I showed it to Matt, my husband. And again, this was not anything I ever thought would be in the world. This was like, look at what I wrote.
Right.
And I was like, this, I don't know why this, I went back to this, like, as that 11-year-old girl, like, this is what worked for me. This is what made sense for me then. And this is the only thing I can hold on to and make sense of this right now. And, put it away and didn't think anything more of it. And then I just kept having this nagging feeling of like, you're supposed to do something with that. So Mickey Harder, local artist here in Durango, she's absolutely amazing. I called her and I said, I have a crazy project, and I know you don't do stuff like this. She's like, actually, I do stuff like this. Let's talk. And I think I had an idea, like, yeah, you could make some cute little animals in it. And she's like, no way. Like this book, this is you. Like, so she's like, I want pictures of you as a little girl. So this little girl in the book is from my pictures.
No way.
Yeah. And, she just gave it so much life. And she took it to such another level that I couldn't have imagined, and so, and I thought, well, I'll self-publish one day, maybe, and I put it back on the shelf, and I had, the crisis of confidence for over a year, and I didn't, touch it. And then it just like never went away.
Mm-hmm.
It was just like, you don't go through this to over and over and over again and get to sit on it. And that's just kind of what kept coming up. And we did IVF again, and, we lost another baby. And I was just like, what is going on? And it was just the darkest time of my life is like where this came out of, to where I was like, okay, if I'm not going to have a baby, maybe I'll have a book, like I'll try with it. And that's where it kind of started.
Was that like I don't know, that you were maybe looking for like a why,
Sure.
from some of it, and thinking that maybe the book would be like, justification is not the right word, but
Totally.
Sort of like at least there's a reason.
Totally. Or at least this came out of this horrible thing, and absolutely.
Right. Yeah. Why do you think the path of a book, like what, because I sense from you that you've got this like genuine desire to help people and connect people and work with this whole navigation of grief.
Yeah.
Have you, I don't know, explored different ways of doing that, or any ideas or insight of like why you think it's kind of come to fruition from the book side of things?
Yeah, well, so it's interesting that you asked that, because I definitely, there was paths along the way that kept drawing me to. So, I lost my dad to suicide, and I was 20 years old. So I lost my brother at 11. I lost my dad whenever I was 20. And
9 years later.
Yeah.
And then 2 babies.
And after that. And so, after losing my dad, that was really, you're 20 years old, I was going to chiropractic school, I'm trying to figure everything out, but that was such a, I guess, kind of critical time, like where you're kind of making decisions for your life, like what am I going to be,
Yeah.
what am I going to do, and so I'd already decided to go to chiropractic school, and it kind of became, how does this now fit with this chiropractic journey? Because I thought I was going to do like sports chiropractic and like be, I want to help sports injuries and get people back on the field. And that is not how my journey went at all. It became like, I'm going to fill your practice with people that are hurting.
Yeah.
Like really hurting deep down. And so, so the practice was one way. And then, I started a company a couple years ago. It was called Living Forward. And this was really geared towards families of suicide, because I will say that at the time when we lost my dad, it was not okay to talk about suicide.
Right.
It's not okay to
mental health in general.
Totally not okay to. This was 2007. Not okay to like say you lost a family member that way. You're gonna get some weird looks too, like, well, are you okay?
Right.
And so I was like, but it's a huge part of my life. It's a huge part of my story.
And a huge part of so many people's.
So many. What was crazy is when we lost my dad, there was no denying what happened, even though like we kind of tried to massage it, and so many people shared with us like, their journey or their family's journey with suicide. And it was one of those things that was like, I never even heard of this really, And so that really, it was always in the back of my mind, like those are going to be the people you help, like that, those are your people, And so when I started this company, Living Forward, it was all around like, this is your tribe. So I did some online classes and some online groups for that. And I still have some projects going with that, but it's just funny how it all kept going back to where like, those are going to be these people with loss and grief, like that's your people.
I want to I want to get more into your mindset and like, I don't know, understand your perspective or kind of your thought process on this, because I alluded to it earlier, but I think that it's remarkable. There's a quote that I love that says, "I've never met a strong person with an easy past," and but I think that it's almost like you've experienced so much loss and so much grief that you're like, I want to now help other people through that, which I think is a unique response to it. And I want to know if that's been your nature always, or if that's been intentional. Like, let me get into your mind a little bit of like the motivational, the factors behind trying to do what you're doing, and instead of just like, because like I mentioned, there's 500 different paths you could take, and to take the path of like, I want to, comfort as many people as I can, or lessen the blow as much as I can on as many people, I think is really, really unique, especially too, knowing that, we're talking about loss that spanned over a lifetime.
Right.
It's not like one event.
Right.
Yeah. And that you still have this like fortitude and strength and kind of desire to help others. Where does that come from?
Well, thank you for saying that, because it doesn't always feel like that. But I don't know where I heard it a long time ago, and I don't know why this has always stuck with me. I didn't come up with it. I heard it somewhere, but it was something to the effect of, if you're not helping, you're not healing.
Mm.
And I do truly believe that, because
Keep going.
I feel like when I'm not actively trying to be in service of other people, and maybe that's just my 2-year-old today, right? But if I'm not really trying to be in service of someone else, I can get way too caught up in my own stuff. And I can get really low. It doesn't take much for that, and so I have to really make that decision. That's like it's almost more of a discipline decision, like working out every morning, and like I can do all of those things, but if I'm not being in service of other people, then I'm just way too caught up in my own stuff. And then I start, thinking about how bad I've had it, and how unfair it was, and how the terrible cards our family was dealt, and that doesn't move the needle, and nobody wants to hear that. And so it just kind of, and don't get me wrong, there's been a lot of like really low days.
Oh gosh,
There was some days
imagine.
There was definitely some days of not showering and laying in the bed for a while.
Right.
But
yeah.
But there was always that like, I know I'll get up again. I know I'll try again. Just it's not gonna be today. And there was a little while, especially after our first loss of our first baby. I remember telling Matt, like, I'm just not sure if I can go on. Like, I'm just not sure if I can weather this one. And he's like, you will. You will. I've just watched you weather a lot of things. And I'm like, well, I'm glad you have faith in me, because I don't have faith in me. And I think that's part of it, too, is who you surround yourself with. I have an excellent partner. I mean, I really don't have many complaints, as far as that goes. And I think that matters. Like, the people around you, are they helping? Because that could, if I'm married to somebody that is like, yeah, you're right, this is awful, let's go get a drink at 11 o'clock in the morning, and let's just, and let's not work out, and let's not eat healthy, then yeah, it would be a totally different trajectory, and very easy to do.
And justified.
Totally justified, and I don't judge people for like that is what they need in the moment.
Right.
But I just know for me, and I knew this early on, whatever I try, I usually like. And if I tried to drink too much, I was gonna like it too much. Or if I was gonna try drugs, I was probably gonna like them too much. And so like that is probably not a good path for me to even try. Because I usually have a good time with whatever I'm doing. And so I really think that was a big part of it too. It was knowing myself too, and knowing
that's the path, that's the outlet.
You can easily go there.
Right.
If you feed that, you can go all the way that way. And that was just really important to me that that's not where I went.
Yeah.
You know?
I love it, and I relate to it so much. So I've got a philosophy, selfish service is what I call it. But I use it a lot of times in examples when I'm talking about I volunteer for the fire department.
Yeah.
I've been doing that I'm in my 8th year now of a volunteer firefighter EMT. But honestly, it's for me. Like, and it's wild how, I forget exactly how you said it, but something to the extent of like, if you want to heal, help.
Right.
Something like that. Like the path to healing is through helping.
Yeah.
And I think it's such a profound thing to consider. Like when I'm at the fire department and I go and help somebody, and there are bad days. I mean, there's times when we can't help and it's awful, which has consequences. But there are good days, and there's days that we do good and that we make an impact, and these things like that. And I think it benefits me way more than the person that we're helping. Right. And I've thought about for a while, like, how amazing the world could be if we all had that approach of like, I've got a good friend, his name's Robel Taylor, he's been on the show a few times, but he says, if you need help, help others. Like when he's looking for, if he's needing work or he's looking for, a pick me up or whatever, he'll just go find somebody to serve, go find service or whatever. It's one of the best things my dad instilled in me was that kind of like service attitude, but I've never thought about it in the context of grief. I've thought about it more like, the fire department for me, it's more of fulfilling, I suppose, or like it makes me feel, I'm trying to think about that. It makes me feel proud of myself for like helping other people, but it's not like necessarily probably deep down, actually, probably there is some healing for all of us. Yeah. But, that idea of like helping somebody navigate the thing that we're struggling with seems counterintuitive on the surface, but I can see how that'd be so profoundly impactful, in practice. And I'm assuming that's been your experience. Well,
and also probably the hardest thing too.
Right.
And I mean, you hear it all the time, and it's, for me, the hardest, the person that hurt you, like, pray for them.
Yeah.
Pray for them the most. And you're like, are you kidding me? They need to be praying for me. Yeah. It's the hardest sometimes, but I think you get the most profound benefits from that.
Right.
And I guess, going back to an earlier question, I don't think I ever really chose this. It was like, all this keeps happening to our family, and what am I going to do with it? And I hear that question a lot when I'm like, what's next?
You're good, I'm just turning it.
Like, what comes next? Or what, it's like, well, what, who needs help? And how are you using what you've been given? Because
for good. That's what I'm so fascinated with, and I'm wondering, I got a little bit of insight, but I'm curious. Like, I don't know. Do you think that the when you're looking back in hindsight, that was like a kind of where you were always meant to be, or that there was the volume of loss, or is it in your nature? I think it's so neat that that you're turning all of this darkness into some light, and like turning these the feel good message, and creating the community and stuff. And I'm just, I don't know, I'm fascinated with the motivation behind it. I know that healing helps, but there's got to be, I don't know, or do you think that it's just kind of evolved naturally?
Well, I think it's probably both. I think there's probably some in my nature of like, I want to help. I want to help people. That's why I chose chiropractic. And I want to work with my hands, and I want to put my hands on people and like help them. And what I didn't know was that was just gonna keep evolving. And I think, like you said, with the volume of loss, I'm like, the hits keep coming.
Right.
As I get another chance to practice, and so I think there's a little bit of that of just like, okay, well, there's been so much prayer and meditation and reflection and really digging over the years to come to a place of just saying, you know, like, okay, use me. Like how, you know, I gotta stop pushing so much and trying to, like I said, I wanted to work with athletes, and I gotta, you know, I'm trying to push this practice and make it all about athletes, and then I gotta line out the door of like people that have like real like deep emotional trauma and things like that. I'm like, that is not what we were doing here. But you know, so I think it was like the more I pushed in one direction, the more I kept
where you were supposed to be.
Just kept getting led to where I was supposed to be, and the right people and the right opportunities kept showing up, and until finally you're like, okay, I'll listen and
time
I'll,
to
like,
lean in.
all right, I'll do
So
what I'm
it's
supposed to do.
Right,
You know?
and resistance isn't the right word, but it's clearly like, I don't know, that idea of like you got to go where you're celebrated, not where you're like, this is where you're supposed to be.
Right.
Yeah,
Well, and
this is
grief's
the-
ugly.
Yeah.
Nobody wants to talk about that, you know, and I don't feel like I'm a ho-hum person, you know. I feel like I'm really upbeat, and I want to be that way, and so I think I resisted it for that too. I'm like, I can't listen to people's problems, and I can't take on all of this stuff, but there is so much beauty in just listening to people's stories.
Yeah.
You know, and just so, and it's so crazy to say, but listening to other people's stories, there is always so much gratitude on my side for what I do have and what I've been through, because it could always be so much worse, and I'm so grateful for the family that I do have, you know. So it's been a lot of that, you know.
Speaking of that, like the beauty that's in it, and it's one of the things that I think is amazing about humanity. You know, it's like that gratitude that can come from things. And I think that if more people understood how much adversity everybody's going through,
Right.
loss or otherwise.
Right.
There's a story. So I lost an aunt in a car accident, and my other aunt was at the gas station or something like recently after, you know, in the depths of grief, and somebody was mean to her, like whatever. I don't know the deep, you know, but the takeaway from it was like, if you had any idea what I was going
Sure.
through, you know, then you know, you'd be kind to me. And I think that hearing people's stories is so valuable because it lets us kind of operate, at least for me personally, with like this baseline of empathy, you know, and understanding, and like we have no clue the battles that people are fighting,
Yeah.
the grief that they're working through, the adversity that they're overcoming, or whatever it might be. And it also kind of can create connection too, you know, like
Sure.
when we're all dealing with our own struggles, and it can feel lonely, and then we remember that we're all
Right.
struggling. So I'm curious though, because you had mentioned about, I think you said, I'm not a ho-hum person
Yeah.
or something, you
Yeah.
know, and we're having a good time here sitting and talking about
Right.
grief, which is a very heavy topic. But
Counterintuitive.
yeah, I sometimes I've been accused of like, I don't know, I'll call it toxic optimism, but like sometimes it's been to a point where it's like, hey, you know, I'm a little too optimistic, which I don't think is the case. But I have been blessed with a positive, optimistic perspective.
Yeah.
Like my glass is always half full,
Yeah.
even if there's a drop in it. You know, I'm
Yeah.
like, hey, at least there's a drop in it. But I'm curious if that's also some of your nature, that kind of like optimism, positivity, you know, or if you think that that's been maybe a result of some of the experiences, or a little bit of both.
I think I like to think I'm a little more optimistic. You know, I like to think it is going to work out in the end. You know, like ultimately that is my thought. Even in the worst of times, I'm like, it's going to work out in the end, right? I mean, it always does. You know, when I think about any situation I've been in, you know, it always works out. So I do think there's you know, a level of, you know, optimism I have, or at least I strive for. You know, because I just think I know that life is too short. You know, my brother was 21 years old. He was in a freak car accident, you know, and it was just boom, it was over, you know. And I think, as awful as that sounds, I learned that from a very young age. Is life's really, really short, and you know, we gotta get on with it. We gotta like make the best of it, and you know, because we're not gonna get a do-over.
Right.
And you know, we just lost a really good friend and business partner. I think it's already been a couple months ago. It feels like it was just last week, and you know, it just reiterates like we're not gonna get a do-over.
Yeah.
You know, and like we gotta like do it the best we can here. You know, and what you were just talking about with your aunt, and that, you know, that if you only knew like what I had been through, you know, I think that is where I got myself into trouble, especially after our loss of our babies, because I felt just so raw. Like literally my skin felt raw, like someone could just poke me and it would just hurt, you know. And I remember, you know, at North City Market, the parking lot's terrible. I mean, it's just a terrible nightmare. So
Whole podcast on that.
Needs to be revamped. But you know, when you turn in from 32nd and you turn right and you go in there, people are always coming out the wrong way, always. And I turned in one day, and I'm, you know, going to get my groceries. It was pretty soon after we had lost, I think it was our first baby, and lady's coming out the wrong way, and I lost it. Just lost it. Just the biggest insult that could have ever happened to me, because I can't go and she's not going to back up, and I'm laying on the horn, and other people are laying on the horn, and I just sit in my car and I'm crying, and I call Matt, and I'm like, she won't back up, and you know, and I'm not backing up because she, you know, if all these people knew what I had just gone through, and I'm not moving my car, and he was like, whew, just come home. Just back up and come home. And I'm like, yeah, that's where I got into trouble, was thinking I was like the only one. You know, I thought for a really long time after that, like I was the only one that was hurting. And it was everybody else's fault. And it was everybody else's fault that had a kid. And it was, you know, and I was like, well, this is not going to be fun for long. You know, this is, and you know, my marriage wasn't fun. You know, our house wasn't fun because there was just so much pain.
Yeah.
You know, and I know that feeling of like, I'm the only one and nobody will get it. And I think that's where, if I'm, you know, probably guilty of oversharing, but I think it's when people share that you realize it just softens you. It
100%.
softens other people. Like you realize other people are hurting, and other people do know what loss feels like, and you know what? They hurt for you too. They can't fix it for you, and that is. Sometimes I still deal with that. You know, sometimes you know, we are so blessed, and we have our little 2-year-old. We call him Dennis the Menace because, whew, like he is on fire all the time. But it's so fun, and you know, it's so awesome. And I'm like, look how awesome this is. Like I'd love, like, let's do it again. Let's, you know. And then I'm like, oh wait, no, like this was it, you know. And sometimes I get jealous, and I'm like, oh. Right, it's not their fault that like we went through that, and it's not. It doesn't diminish my pain that somebody or that a friend is having a baby, or you know, things like that. And so now when I get in that mindset, I'm like, okay, who needs my help today? Who can I call and like offer something to? Can I make a chicken and rice casserole, because I'm really good at that? You know, like, can I do something with my hands for somebody else? Because I think it's like that action step for me helps. And I you know, I tell people that I'm like, you can stay in your head all day long, but like just get up and take an action step towards something.
Yeah.
Something positive, like whether it's working out or, doing something for somebody else. It's huge.
It's huge. And I just think it's so fascinating, so, impressive that you've been able to, one of the things, and it's come up multiple times on the podcast, but that I think is really especially unique is when somebody has had the ability to pull themselves from a dark place. Because they're in a dark place. Like I think sometimes we overlook how challenging that is to go from, a dark place to a better place. Because we all know, when you're in a like really dark place, there's nothing there. There's nothing in the tank. Like it's so hard to, to do something with that and to figure out that, you can take some action from it and turn it from there. I'm curious though, you had mentioned kind of this idea, and I think that you alluded to it, that when you lost your brother, that's when kind of, that realization of how short life is, like how fragile it is, and that we only get one.
Yeah.
Kind of curious how that's changed your perspective of life and like, your day-to-day stuff. I know whenever I see something horrible at the fire department or in the news or anything, it makes me want to just like hug my family and freaking never leave the house, And then I'm like, gosh, dang, we have to drive, I'm like,
Can we get a bubble wrap?
Yeah, like, how can we?
Totally.
But it also like, again, the optimist in me, but like when I see tragedy or things like that, for me, it's been a very helpful reminder of priorities. Like I have a tendency of working too hard. Yeah. I'm chasing dreams. I'm really trying to, build a company and an audience and I'm doing all these things.
Right.
And then I'm like, ugh, I gotta be present with my kids. I gotta be a good husband. I gotta slow down. And I'm just kind of curious, like that realization for you of how short and fragile life is, how that's impacted your priorities, your trajectories, where you're spending your time and energy, and how that's looked.
I will say that for me, definitely, priorities. And, I look at my mom, and my dad was 55 when he died. And, that is so young now that I'm knocking on the door at 40. Not quite, but I'm,
We're in our 30s.
We're in the hallway, But, like 55, that's so young. Like you still had a whole nother life, to do. And so then I look at my mom and I'm like, no, you have the rest of your life. And then my husband's dad also passed away. And so like we have, our moms. And I'm watching these women navigate life without their person. And I'm like, Matt, we're not waiting till retirement age to do the things. We're not putting all these things off. We'll enjoy it later because I've just seen like there might not be a later. Mm-hmm. And so that has really shifted like our goals and our priorities as far as like, travel's a big one for us. Like, let's do the things and let's do things together. And, when I had the practice, I was traveling an awful lot for, conferences, and I was speaking at a bunch of places, and it was the same thing. I'm like, I want to be on a plane, but with you.
Right.
I want to be doing things with you. I don't want to be going just elevating my star on my own, And so I think that was part of it too, where it was like, he had the restaurant, he had gazpacho, and I had the practice. So we're both running our businesses, and it was just like, when are we making time for each other? And then, so it was like, yeah, we're not getting pregnant,
Right.
That's not exactly happening. And so then, because it was such a struggle to get our baby, Cash is his name, not because he cost so much, we just really liked the name, but
but also,
but I mean, he wasn't cheap, but but now and whenever we were pregnant, we're like, everything changes, like these are our priorities. And we tried so hard to get him, and all the things that I thought would be important, they're just not. And it's just, I love our little bubble at home, and it's so much more important to me than I thought it would be, and I just, whenever I do get caught up in the stuff and what's next, and okay, we've got cash, and he's doing great, and so now what am I gonna do? And it's like, no, that's just taking you away from the thing. And not that I don't have to work.
Of course.
We have to work. But just that has to be a bigger priority, because it's so easy to get caught up in everything else.
Right.
So easy to. And I see, in a big perspective shifter for me, I love my dad, self-made, came from a family of 9 on a farm, nothing. Became very, very uber successful. All he did was work. All he did was work and strive and get to the next thing and get to the next thing. And I remember, I think he, at some point he told my mom, it's like, I'm in a tunnel and there is no light, and I can't imagine there being a light. And so I'm like, I can't be like that.
Right.
I can't let myself go there. And I see other people, doing that, and I'm like, you gotta do something different. You gotta take an action and do something different. That will tell your brain you can.
Yeah.
That will physiologically tell your brain you can do something different. And then, my gosh, you do it again.
Right.
You do it again, and then all of a sudden you're living again, and that's awesome, because I think for a long time, my dad had just stopped living before he died,
At risk of prying too deep, and so don't let me, but was it as a result of the loss of your brother, like the tunnel that your dad was in, and kind of I'm curious if you think the same outcome would have occurred had your brother not died.
No, and I think about this a lot. They were super close. He was the only boy in the family, super close, going to take over the family businesses. And, I think that when Neil, that was my brother, when Neil died, it just extinguished the spark, And I think after that, he just, it was a long game, right? And it was, so there was so much we didn't know, not talked about, definitely. And that was my thing growing up. I remember doing one family counseling session. One. Well, that's huge for kids to not be able to come together with a unit that's been fractured like that.
Yeah.
And so right then, it kind of set the tone of everybody's going to do their own thing.
You got to go figure it out. Right?
Yeah. And for me, I was like, that can't work, And I ultimately think it didn't work for our family. I think we didn't know what was going on with our dad. We really just didn't until it was too late. And so I think that is also, with the book, I'm like, I want to do a kid's book, a young enough kid's book that a parent has to read it to them. You have to read that to them. They are going to ask you questions, and you have to be engaged with it.
Right.
Because that's the only way you come out as a unit, and that you come out, I don't want to say stronger, but I think you ultimately will.
I think that's fair. Yeah.
Yeah.
And the reason for that, because, there's obviously this, and I know that so many reasons for your desire to help people and get the message out there, but I can't help but wonder if there was more open communication. Just the resources for your dad and, you know, the
Right.
stigmas and those things that I think generally speaking, the society, we're all doing a better job of
Right.
communicating and like working, you know, beyond that stuff.
Mm-hmm.
But, you know, there's so much value, I think, in opening up. You mentioned earlier that maybe you're an overshare.
Yeah.
Furthest thing from it, in my opinion, because I really do think that the people need to be more vulnerable and share more of their stories. I do it all the time, and sometimes I tell my wife, I'm like, I wonder if I share too much about like I'll you know, find a success somewhere, and I'm like, I want everyone to come with, and I'll share
Right.
how I saved the money, how much I put down, what the investment, you know, like what,
Right.
how I did it, and everyone's like, I'm like, no, it's because I'm wanting to share good information
Yeah.
to collectively elevate all of us,
Mm-hmm.
you know, and I think that this it falls into that category of like, you're not oversharing. It's like we can elevate it for everybody if we're open about things and talk about things and stuff like that. And so anyway, that's just kind of what was driving that curiosity with your dad.
And I also think like there's so much, you know, I have talked with and interviewed, I mean, I use that, you know, term lightly, but over 100 families of suicide. And shame and secrets are always in there.
Mm.
And for me, I'm like, I'm just not going to play. I'm not going to play that, you know. I mean, which I also don't live in the South anymore. I moved 2,000 miles away, you know. So, and we are in a community that really allows that and really supports that. And, but I think you just can't keep it in the dark.
No.
Because, I mean, it grows, it festers, it's always like a whispering in your ear. And, you know, I think that is why we're seeing huge shifts in mental health and the conversations around them. And we're seeing, you'd be hard pressed to find anybody that's not struggling with something, or in their family, you know, and so it's like, oh, we are more alike than we're different, you know, and I think that is so refreshing. And I think that, I mean, that's what's going to take.
Right.
That's what's going to take for, you know, is for, you know, I know I was scared of it too. Well, what if my dad had have, you know, opened up and shared more? Would he have like been committed? You know, I mean, I don't know. That was a fear of mine as a young person. Like, do they think we're crazy? Do they think my dad's crazy? They have a fear. You know, I get it, but understanding now, yeah, it all grows in the dark.
Yeah.
You know, and so I mean, it's like mold almost, you know, and it grows and it's silent until all of a sudden it's not.
Right.
And so I think that's why for me, I want to help other people, most definitely. Like, that's huge to me to be able to use my story for good, because there's so much pain in it. But also, I can't keep it in the dark because that's just bad for me, and that's bad for my health. You know, so yeah, there's some
selfish service.
There's some selfish service in there. I'm using that.
100%. Tell me more about those interviews with the families. I didn't realize that it was that extensive, but you've interviewed, you said, over 100 families
from all over the country, and
the biggest commonality was shame.
And or there was some secrecy within that, you know, around mental health. Yeah. You know, on top of course, there's like, you know, the shock and the grief and all of that.
Oh, so the commonality, the common trait was the feeling of shame of the families that have lost somebody to suicide. Yes. Not of the person that had committed suicide.
And so absolutely. And I'm sure the person had that too, right? You know, I'm sure I'm sure that if I dug into everything with my dad, I'm sure he was battling all kinds of things like that. But those conversations were not being had. But talking to families left behind after suicide loss, there's a lot of embarrassment and there's a lot of shame around that. And they're, they don't want to, nobody's broadcasting that. It's not exactly, it's not fun to talk about, but and I forget right off of the top of my head the statistics. I think when a parent commits suicide, I think it's like the child has like a 1 in 3 chance of at least attempting suicide. And I'll need to recheck my date on that, but it was something that.
But it's heightened.
Very significant.
Yeah.
And so for me, I'm like, no, that does not work. That is not okay. So that's why we see those suicide trends in families, is because that's what was modeled for them, a coping strategy or mechanism for the family. And then, okay, I feel shame about this. I'm embarrassed about it. And so it's almost like, I'm not going to share about it. I'm almost going to in my case, keep my dad's secrets and then keep my own feelings a secret. And then, a person can only hold so much before they get really sick, physically sick. And that's what I feel like I saw in my practice a lot too. Is these physical manifestations.
Carrying it physically.
And I'm like, oh my gosh, touching your mid-back and over your lungs and over your heart and your chest is trying to adjust this wall. What's going on? When you start digging and they're walled off. There's so much grief in there and it gets locked. And we guard our heart.
And it manifests physically.
Your cells change.
So I had Dr. Wood from Wood Chiropractic on, talk to me about traumas, toxins, and thoughts, and how those impact our nervous system. And I've also had a couple of doctors of naturopathic doctors on the podcast, and talk about kind of this mind, body, soul connection, and how related it all is. And that is another example of how fascinating it is, how complex we are as creatures, and how though we need to focus on the mental component and the soul component, because it's literally physically manifesting itself. Yeah. If that right there isn't enough argument that it needs to get dealt with, the benefits of whether it's talk therapy or, group meetings or even just, support groups or whatever, because I think, and I do think we're doing a better job, but generally speaking, we can't see it. And so the mental struggles are hard to tackle, because there's stigmas with them and there's all that stuff. But what a perfect example and evidence that it's just as serious as needing it causes the need for a chiropractic adjustment, Right. But I think that's a takeaway of that. If we're struggling with mental health, or we're feeling shame, or keeping secret, or all of those things, that's a part of us. Right. That's the same as having being misaligned or having a broken leg or whatever. And if we can get to the point where we don't ignore it, how powerful that can be. Well, and I think a lot of the stigma too is, especially particularly in families of suicide, is, it's genetic, and it's from the research and from what we know, the genetic part plays a very small role. Mm. It's more mental health, anything, really, when you break it down, any disease or any disease process, and I consider mental health struggles, depression, all that, a disease process that's kind of taken over the body, taken over the brain. It's really more of a conversation of epigenetics, and what environment are we putting ourselves in? Thoughts, what are we feeding it? Literally and figuratively, if I'm, eating sugar, which is inflammatory, and I'm sitting around and, and then I have all these toxic thoughts, it's exponentially worse. I'm literally turning on the genes that are going to express depression and anxiety and all of those things. But if I'm again taking the action steps and doing something different, then you see a totally different person than maybe a parent. Right. And yes, I think the ability to turn those genes on, it's there. Just like with me, it's very easy for me to go to a dark place, but I know where I come from. Right. And I'm like,
That's not going to be my story. So if it's not going to be my story, then I have to do X, Y, Z and
To
make
change
sure
the
that
story.
it's not.
Yeah.
So that's where, yes, this was totally not fair that this was the hand that we were dealt. However, I have a responsibility to myself and then now my family to do it differently.
To break the chain?
Sure.
To create a new norm?
Sure. To change, you know, how we're going to deal with things, how we're going to cope, how we're going to talk. We are going to, I'm sorry, Cash, but we are sitting at the kitchen table and we are talking, buddy.
We're going to talk about our feelings.
Ooh, we're going to talk it out.
Whether you like it or not.
And I think, like, and sharing those struggles with our kids, you know, like, that's huge. I, as an adult, wish I had known so much more.
Yeah.
You know, I don't need to know all the ugly of my parents' marriage or any of that.
The financial stress, whatever.
Right.
You know, I mean, there's certain stuff I definitely
But
protect
I needed
my
them
kids
to be
from.
real.
Yeah.
And that's what wasn't happening. And then I'm faced with things and I'm like, what is this? I don't know what this is. Things are supposed to be perfect.
Right. Yeah, and it's almost now like you're not equipped as a child to you have no tools.
Right.
You know, nowhere to put it. I love that and I admire that idea of like breaking the chain or you know learning the norms or whatever it might be. I run ultras and I recently ran a 100-miler in March.
Nice.
And a lot of it's for myself. You know, I'm breaking my own chains too. You know, like trying to create a new norm and a new standard and things like that. But part of it, I'll be honest, is that I want to normalize big things for my kids.
Yes.
Like I want my kids to think that they can do anything, and because they can.
Yeah.
You know, and I grew up in a very strictly religious background. You know, and those ideas of like shame and you know, secrets and guilt and stuff like that. I mean, maybe I shouldn't say this on here, but I'm gonna. My dad jokes that Catholics invented shame and guilt, Mormons perfected it.
There you go. I heard that.
But you know, and there's been those navigation things, but now like having this approach of I've got a comfort level of saying I don't know to my kids. But of like that we're gonna work through it, you know, like this is hard and I don't know the answer, you know, but we're feeling the way we're feeling right now and let's talk about it, you know, let's and those things that like it gives I think almost my kids permission to say like first of all it's okay to feel our feelings.
Yes.
Secondly, let's talk through it.
Yeah.
And we don't have to have all the answers.
Yeah.
You know? But what we do know are these things, like you said, take those action steps.
Yeah.
I feel better when I'm helping people.
Yes.
I'm a better version of myself when I'm not drinking alcohol.
Yes.
I feel better when I get a good night's sleep, you know? Like, do I have all the answers? Not even close.
Right.
But I am, you know, there are these like action steps. I like the words you use there. Formula, recipe, whatever it might be that at least contributes in the positive to, you know, as good of a day as it can be.
Right.
You know, that type of thing, which I think, and that's why I'm so, that's why I think your vulnerability and like you sharing your story is so not only inspirational, but necessary, you know, of like, we gotta break the norms, break the standards and start figuring out a better way to navigate, you know, all of this stuff, you know, from a parenting perspective, but a society perspective, and all of that too. And, you know, anyway, I just think that's I think it's a great approach and sort of mindset that you have on that side of it. And just, I don't know, it's almost like there's, and don't let me put words in your mouth, but there's just like we're going to do it a different way. You know, we're going to, I don't know if better is the right word, but we're the other way didn't work. Right. We're going to try it this way.
And at least it's coming from a good place. Like going back to what you said, you know, earlier, like, yeah, you know, and maybe we're going to overshare in our house and maybe we'll over talk it, but it's coming from a good place.
Yeah.
And it's not trying to stifle your feelings or your feelings are too big for me to deal with. You know, like you're gonna have to go like figure that out on your own. You know, I think that's important. You know, and I'm no parenting expert. You know, by no means I'm no expert on anything, but just learning through the years. You know, we were taught, or I was taught really early on. You know, Elizabeth Kubler-Ross. She developed, you know, the stages of grief. And I was taught, like, these are the stages of grief, and you're just going to go through them, and then it's like over.
And then you're done.
It's like, okay, you know, I love a checklist.
Just got to buy my time.
I'm really, really good on a checklist or a to-do list, you know. That's perfect. That works for me. Oh, wait, it's not like that at all. And it's really like, that's a metaphor for life, too. It's not linear. And that grief process is not linear. And, you know, there's days that are, like, really good, and then there's days when you're like, I really thought I don't want to say over it or past it, but like, man, I thought I was doing a lot better than this.
Yeah.
And then, you know, but if you know that, then you can weather that storm, I feel like, a little bit better. And, you know, it's messy, you know, but knowing that that's messy and having those conversations within families of not like, yeah, I understand you're sad today, and I understand that you're mad, you know, and okay, and next you're going to get to denial, and then you're well on your way.
And then here's your gold star.
It's just not true, you know, and I think that's kind of where I was as a kid at 11. You know, I'm like in that preteen, like girl age, like everything's getting awkward, and then to have this thing that I feel like, you know, that's all people see when they see me or they see our family.
Like it was your identity almost?
Totally. And then, you know, okay, so I'm going to, you know, and maybe I didn't know it at the time, but I carried that grief into tons of situations. And, you know, those are your formative years. And not dealing with that, I just feel like, and not to throw my family under the bus, because I truly believe that everybody was doing the best that they could, you know.
Of course.
But not having like this unit, this, you know, support system as a family, that's really hard, and that's totally what I want to change. I mean, I know that everybody has their own comfort level with sharing and talking, and that's fine, but there's just a difference in doing it together and not. And there's a difference when tragedy strikes. Are you going to go it together, or is it going to tear your family apart? And I watched it tear my family apart. I watched us not kind of become a unit like I feel like families should in those situations. And like I said, everybody did the best they could. But for me, now I look at other kids that are going through grief, and I'm like, man, I'm almost jealous that you have this like nice little cohesive unit, and like this book is like sparking conversations, and you know, from kids to adults to therapists, like, you know, and I'm like, it took on a life of its own out of my own like pain and need for something.
Yeah.
You know?
Is that, because I was going to ask, like, why a children's book?
Yeah. I think it's just that, you know, there's a saying in chiropractic that's like, as the twig is bent, so grows the tree. Talking about the spine. You know, well, I think that's so true for everything, you know, and I think like kids with grief oftentimes get overlooked because we say kids are so resilient.
Yeah, and I think we almost dismiss their pain.
Totally, because they're playing and it looks fine, and you know they're asking to go do things.
They don't know how to articulate it.
Right, but it's still there for them too, and I think that's why I'm like, if we get the kids and we get the conversation started, it changes the whole family dynamic. It changes the whole household. And, you know, I'm not some literary genius or anything. And Rick Rubin, the music producer, I just love him. He's just so awesome to me. Anytime he's on a podcast or anything, I listen to him. He's so fun and has so much cool stuff to share. But one thing that he said, I don't remember where it was, but he said, if you make the thing for you and not for everybody else, or whatever you make needs to be for you and not for everybody else, something to that effect. And I realized, I'm like, I totally made this for me.
For you. Mm-hmm.
I totally made this for me. I thought of this concept, this idea whenever I was 11 years old, like sitting in my window looking at the night sky, trying to make sense of it. And like, where did my brother go? Because I grew up in a really religious household too. And, I just knew, oh, he's in heaven. End of story. And okay, well, and almost to just feel like, I can still talk to him and I can still, like, he can still be there. I still wanted him so much to be a part of my life. And so this little book that I needed for myself and I wrote for myself and then Mickey, like, just made beautiful.
Yeah.
Is like taking on like wings of its own, and I have adults telling me, I took it to my therapy session with me and I went through it with my therapist. And I'm like, what? And then I have like kids and a whole family, like we read it almost every night and we got a telescope because of it for Christmas. And we're like, and I'm like, what? Like, these are just things that I never thought. And I have therapists like, I'm giving this as a gift to my clients. And, so already it's like, okay, it's already done and exceeded like more than I could have ever thought. And so,
how does that feel?
Yeah, that for me is like where it's crazy. It's absolutely crazy. Because I just think of, like I almost just let it sit on the shelf because I was too afraid, and I was too scared to just put it out there. And then it gets picked up by a publisher and it starts going. And then I'm almost like, I want to grab it back. I'm not sure if I'm ready. And, but this is where, to me, I'm like, this is where it all becomes worth it. When you, like, I'm like, okay, I'm seeing shifts in people, and at least there's a little bit of comfort, for them in the darkest moments of their life. And so, it's really crazy. I'm like, I totally prayed for this and now this is happening. I remember when I sent it to the publisher and I thought I'd never hear back. And within 24 hours, it was, we want this, we'll have a contract to you in like 48 hours. And I remember, praying like, all right, I don't know what it's going to do. I just hope it touches the people it's supposed to touch and it, it gets in the hands it's supposed to. And so I think it's doing that. And so it's amazing.
Does it feel real? I mean, like, has it sunk in that this is out there and that it's impacting people? And
no, and it's so crazy is I have some copies at my house and it's so funny. Cash walks by and I'm like, he's like, Mommy book. And I'm like, it is Mommy's book. It is Mommy's book. It's really, it's really crazy.
It's so great.
It's really, I'm really grateful for it. I'm really grateful for the opportunity to put it out there. I'm really grateful that somebody else thought like it needed to be in the world
that
too.
It was worth, yeah.
Yeah. So that's, yeah.
It's amazing.
Yeah.
And I'll link it, in the
cool.
in the show notes. So just for everybody listening, there'll be a link in the description and all of that, obviously, because it's great.
Thank you.
And I don't know. I just want to tell you thanks for I mean, obviously, thank you for giving me some time today. I really appreciate that because I know how valuable your time is. But
Thank you.
thank you way beyond that for your vulnerability and for your authenticity, and for your resiliency, and just for like taking so much darkness and turning it into so much light. It's remarkable. You're making me emotional, but the world needs more of it. And I hope you know how amazing it is that you've been able to have the journey that you've had, and that you've been able to turn it into so much positivity and good, and, you know, impacting so many lives. And I hope that, you know, you take a moment every once in a while and smile about that, because it's incredible, and I want to thank you for it. So I've got my tradition here.
Oh,
is
you
I've
got me
my-
sweating, man.
Me
Thank
too.
you so much.
So these are my Inspired by Example shirts.
I love it.
And I want you to have them because you're inspiring by example. And so thank you so much for your strength. And, you know, like I said, you are not an oversharer. People need more of it. And Haley, just thank you so much.
Thank you, Ben. Thank you so much for this opportunity. I mean, I can't thank you enough.
I appreciate it.
Yeah.